We've reached the final step of making our t-shirt quilt, and that's to put the binding on. To figure out how many strips of binding you need for your quilt, add up the perimeter of the quilt and divide that measurement by 40. 40 is the width you can get out of most fabrics, and then you're going to want to round up. I need 7.5 strips for my quilt, so I cut 8. And you're going to cut as many strips as you need, 2.5 inches by the width of fabric. So I've already done that. And then you're going to sew them together, right sides together. And what I've done here is I've arranged them so that they're overlapping at a right angle. And I have them going over each other, overlapping a little extra, so that way I can clearly see from corner to corner, because I'm going to be sewing from here to here. You don't want to sew from here to here, otherwise it's going to go over wrong. So I'm just going to mark a line, or first I'm going to put a pin in here to keep everything where it should be. When you get a little better at this, you don't need to use the pin, but for your first time, go ahead and use it. And then I'm going to use this chalk marking tool to draw a line from corner to corner. That line isn't incredibly straight, but that's okay. I can usually eyeball this, but you can get out your ruler and do that. And now just using a regular stitch, I'm going to stitch from corner to corner and do this here. So as I'm coming to this edge, I'm aiming for where these two strips come together. That's where I want my needle to come out at. And then, when you've done that, you just kind of want to open up your strip and make sure that everything is lined up, and it is. We can see that it's lined up here and here. It's still pretty even. So once you do that and you're happy with how it's joined, you want to cut these strips off to about 1/4 inch seam allowance. It doesn't have to be exact, but you don't want it to get too narrow because you don't want it to come apart after it's been sewn together. Now we're going to go over to the iron. Well, you keep doing that until you have enough strips, but I've already pre-sewn some of these for this video. So what you do next is you want to press these open. So I've got it laid out here, and I'm going to set my seam. And then I'm going to press it open the way we opened it up before. And then with my wrong sides together, I'm going to, well, first of all, I need to cut off this selvage edge because we don't want to use that. The selvage edge has a different weave than the rest of the fabric, so you don't ever want to use the selvage in your quilt. So I'm going to fold this so that there is a 45-degree angle here, and that's going to form a little pocket when we put this on our quilt. And I'm going to press that in place, and then I'm going to fold it in half lengthwise, like this. And I'm just going to keep pressing. So press open all your seams, and then continue to press it in half all the way to the edge of your binding. And that takes a little bit of time, but go ahead and do that, and then we will do the next step. Alright, I've done a couple things. I've changed my foot from a 1/4 inch presser foot to a walking foot. You need that so that we can go through all, so it'll move along all the layers of the quilt and the binding at the same speed. And I'm taking the edge that we made the corner on, and I'm going to lay that down even with the edge of my quilt. And I always start at the bottom of my quilt. That way, just in case this doesn't turn out perfect, that's the least place people are going to look. So I'm not going to start sewing right here because we need to leave this part open and free for when we come around to finish it. So I'm starting a few inches in, and I'm going to stitch a few stitches forward and back to really lock that in there. And just kind of arrange it And then make sure that this binding here is right even with the edge of the quilt. And I'm just going to sew down. And I kind of use the metal edge here as my guide for my 1/4 inch. And your walking foot might be a little bit different, so experiment a little bit to figure out what is where the 1/4 inch mark is, because you won't be able to use any guides on your machine to do that. And I'm not really pulling the fabric through, I'm letting the quilt goat do that on its own, because that's what the walking foot and the feed dogs do. You can stop. But don't go too far.
It's not stopping.
You have to hold it down.
It's not doing anything.
Give it to me. Why won't this stop? When you come to a corner, you want to make a mitered corner, and that makes your corners of your quilt very sharp and at a 90-degree angle. So as you're coming to the edge, you want to sew until you're about a 1/4 inch away from the edge of your quilt, which I am right now. And then you're going to lift up your presser foot and turn the quilt so that the edge you're going to sew next is facing you. And now you can lift up your needle and just pull it out just a little bit, because you don't want a ton of loose thread here, but a little bit is okay. So now I'm folding the binding so that it's going back, and it's creating a 45-degree angle here on the corner. And then I'm going to fold that down towards me, leaving this 45-degree angle here. And now it'll be facing towards me. So I'm going to have this little flap here to the left of my sewing machine, or to the left of my needle. And then I'm starting at the tip of the quilt, the corner, and I'm going to start sewing again. And you should have, this should be totally free here. And then you just keep sewing until you get to another corner, and then sew another miter. When you come back around to the bottom of your quilt, you want to stop about 3 or 4 inches from where you started. So you're going to have a nice about 1 inch or so between where you've stopped and where your flap of your corner that we folded is. And so you want to pin that in place and straighten that back out so that it lays nice and flat. And then you're going to bring your binding down like you would continue sewing it in line with your quilt, but you're going to fold it up so that it creates another angle, and that way you'll have the original flap and then the second 45-degree angle here. And that'll tuck into each other once we get done. So once you have that in line, go ahead and hold it in place with your hands and sew over. And then you're going to sew past where you started and then stitch in place to really lock that in there, because you don't want those stitches to come out. Then you can break your thread. And now we have to cut off this extra binding. And to do that, we want this to fit in there, inside here. So I make a cut in the extra about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom of the top of your fold of your binding. And then I unfold it and slice that clean off. And then when we sew the binding around to the back, that's going to fit right in this flap here. But go ahead and take out your pin, and now it's time to cut off our batting and backing that's extra. I like to leave my batting and backing fabric that's extra on because when I'm sewing on the binding to the front, because that helps give a little traction for that walking foot. But now we need to cut that off. And to do that, I take my quilting ruler and I lay it right over and line it up with the edge of the fabric. I usually will give it a little bit of extra room because I don't want to cut off these mitered corners that we made, so we want to be sure to give that a little extra room so that we don't cut that off. And then I just take my rotary cutter, slice down, make sure that went through. And this part I'm just going to cut to get to here for this first corner. But you just keep cutting this away until you go all the way around your quilt. And again, be very careful not to actually cut into your quilt or your binding when you're doing this. Otherwise, you're going to be very unhappy because you're going to be redoing the whole thing.